Mr. Chairman, you're up.
All right, we'll call to order the regular board meeting of the Montana Board of Investments, December 10th, 2025. First item, do take note that this meeting is being video recorded. Next item, roll call. Savannah, can you assist with the roll call?
I can do that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning to you and members of the board. Jeff Meredith.
Present.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Oh, Jeff
Yep.
Meredith.
Here.
Perfect. Cindy Youngkin.
Here.
Here.
Porter Bennett.
Here.
Tim Kober.
Here.
Maggie Peterson.
Here.
Mark Berry.
Here.
John Milanovich.
Here.
Dan Trost.
Here.
Dwayne Iverson.
Here.
Representative Larry Brewster.
Here.
And Senator Shane Morajou. Do not see him online, but we do have a quorum. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, next item. Is there any public comment on issues with board jurisdiction?
I'm not seeing any hands. Nope, no
Okay,
hands.
moving on. Approval of the no hands. Okay, thanks, Dan.
Yep.
Next item, approval of the October 14th, 2025 meeting minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I would move to approve the
I'll entertain a motion unless there's any
board meeting
questions.
minutes.
All right, we got a motion from Cindy. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
We got a second from Porter. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes. Next item, administrative business. So just a few minutes earlier, we concluded the audit committee meeting, and we do have some decisions that will flow up to the full board. So Mark, could you provide a summary of what we talked about and what we need to approve?
Well, during the audit committee, we went over the audit checklist. It would be the final checklist items for fiscal year 2025, and Julie went over those items. And for our full board approval, the committee approved the annual statutory compliance checklist that was presented to us with outstanding items subject to legislative audit completion, which sounds like we won't get an opinion date until the first part of January, although they are planning to complete their field work next week. But we approved the annual statutory compliance checklist. We also approved the staff provided us with their affirmation of compliance with the audit committee charter. And we're asking for the full board to approve the staff's affirmation, which is included in our board packet. And also we affirmed the audit committee charter policy number 10.161. We had no changes to make to the audit committee charter. So we affirmed and approved the audit committee charter that we're asking the full board to approve as well. We did go over the draft fiscal year 2025 annual report and approved that pending any edits that might occur after final review and final audit. And then finally, we also approved the fiscal year 2025 financial statements for the Unified Investment Program and the Enterprise Fund financial statements for the year. These were approved subject to completion of the fiscal year 25 audit by the Legislative Audit Division. But we did approve those statements subject to any changes that might occur there, because we don't feel that there's probably going to be anything material for us to be concerned about. If there is, that the executive director will bring those to our attention. So with that, Mr. Chairman, request approval of the annual statutory compliance checklist, the staff affirmation of compliance with the audit committee charter and approval of the audit committee charter policy number 10.161. The draft annual financial report for fiscal year 2025 and the draft financial statements fiscal year 2025 for the UIP and the enterprise fund. I'll make that as a motion. How's that?
All right, thank you, Mark.
I'll second the motion.
We'll take that as a motion. All right, we got a motion and a second. Any additional discussion?
Mr.
Hearing
Chair,
none, all in favor?
There is
Yes,
a question.
Go ahead.
you not here?
Maggie has something.
No, it's all right.
Okay, Maggie doesn't have anything.
He must have a delay.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay, so Maggie, you're okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, all right, so all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. Thanks, Mark.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next item on the agenda, comments. You bet. Next item, comments from the TRS and PERS board members. So we'll go right back to Maggie. If you
Well,
want to give us an update.
Mine is simple, Jeff. I have nothing to report because we meet tomorrow. We have not met since our last meeting, so that was easy. Thank you. I would like to say that Executive Director Villa
All right,
will be
thanks.
presenting.
Thank you. TRS, Dan, do you have anything to update the committee on?
Yeah, I'll be quick too. We had a meeting last Friday. We mostly did some administrative things. There was really nothing substantial that we did, although we did have Director Villa come and fill us in on everything that's going on with the board. He did a fantastic job, and everybody is really pleased with the work that the board is doing. So just a good report overall.
All right, thanks, Dan. All right, moving on, comments from board legislative liaisons. Thanks, so we always appreciate you joining. Representative Brewster, do you have anything to update the committee on?
No, not really. I just comment that the director did a great job in the Billings area, putting together that package for the treatment center, and I really appreciate his efforts to make that work for the community.
Thank you very much. All right, moving on to tab 2, Executive Director reports.
all righty. Mr. Chairman, you have the monthly snapshot. You also have our annual Limited Partner Advisory Council reporting. This is where we are, I guess I'll stare across the room and have John correct me when I screw this up. But when we have substantial commitments to private equity firms or other funds, we seek a Limited Partner Advisory Council seat in order to get better information and build our network amongst our other limited partners. Annually, we report to you on who has traveled and for what purpose. This is that annual report. You also have the securities litigation annual review, as well as the dollars we have been able to recover for our participants. Happy to answer any questions on that, as well as our Director of Operations, Aaron Crippen. You have policy 10.217. This is again part of our annual reporting to you, reauthorization of investment vendors. As I mentioned in the audit committee, some of you weren't here. I'm going to roll this up into the into the statutory compliance checklist over the course of the next year. So this will be another red line document you'll see on an ongoing basis. So as we add managers that we haven't had a relationship before, or managers drop out for any one of a number of reasons, you will see that in more real time rather than having to wait to the end of the calendar year. It also just makes it easier for us to track and report on. So you'll get that on a going forward basis. Budget status year to date is attached. We're in good shape. Only thing I would add is we've added a crosswalk from the Montana Operations Manual to the line items that you see in the budget. The last time we saw the budget, there was a bunch of questions on this $4,000 or that $14,000. There's a crosswalk now, so you can see what is classified under each line item. That's in the appendix of your board packet. And then the last item, authorization to proceed with land purchase. So I've discussed this with the board previously. Board policy requires that any directly held real estate receive board approval. This is my request to you to actually proceed with purchasing land in Laurel due to the budget director's approval and the director of HHS's selection as Laurel as the site for the facility. I will say we do not have a piece of land in mind. We are looking. I did make a statement along with the director of HHS last night to the Laurel City Council. My commitment to them is they will not see anything in a press release from the board or from DPHHS. They will hear it directly from us to the city council on a go-forward basis. That includes if we're able to find land. The land that we're looking for, obviously we're looking for things that have good infrastructure that can pass geotechnical review. This is going to be a pretty heavy building, so we got to make sure that the foundations are stable enough and that the dirt underneath can sustain cinder blocks and thick foundations. So this request is basically to authorize me to work with the budget office and DPHHS to go find that land and purchase it. I will say, after Laurel was announced, land prices miraculously went up in Laurel by about 53% on one particular piece of property. I know that shocks everybody. So we're a little behind the 8 ball on that side of things, but we still have to proceed. So I'm happy to answer any questions the board has on this. I'm sure you've got some, but we need to start with purchasing a piece of land, and then you'll hear back from me again when we have some final designs and are ready to move to the next phase of contracting and getting stuff built.
Just one question. Wherever you
Are there any
purchase,
questions? Go ahead, Cindy.
for Dan,
Yep.
the land that gets purchased would be something that is either within city limits or can be annexed into city limits, right?
Correct. From an infrastructure perspective, we want to be within the city limits. So we want to either find land within. I don't think we'll find that. I think it's very likely we'll find something on the periphery. And then I've also committed to the city of Laurel. We're going to go through your public process. So they have land use planning regulations for annexation. They have zoning requirements. We would then start that process, just like we did in Deer Lodge with the Pintler Meadows properties.
Thank you.
You bet. John had a question.
Yeah, hey Dan.
Any other questions?
This is like a real delay,
What?
like a satellite delay. So yeah, no, thank you for the diligent work here, Dan. But I just wanted to my question is, did we decide as a group going forward? I mean, I know this ship has sailed; it's a done deal. I'm still concerned about like something that the real estate, direct and real estate being such a small portfolio impact to our overall position, but having a lot of potential liability. Is this something going forward? We're kind of saying, hey, listen, let's take a step back from the government, from the administration, and from the legislature passing us projects to run, or what are we thinking there? Just curious.
I'll give you my personal opinion. This is a headline risk for the board that we don't control. The legislature has said thou shalt. The governor has signed the bill that said thou shalt. So in this instance, as you said, the ship has sailed. On a go-forward basis, I mean, I think the consensus of the board, and certainly my opinion, is to the extent we can avoid processes and projects like this on a go-forward basis, we should. I think if there is a revision necessary for the way the state procures, builds, whatever real property, that's a legislative executive conversation, and they need to figure out their better mousetrap. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, Dan, I do appreciate the attachments included here. It does, like you said, provide some kind of clarity on the direction for this specific project. And some comfort in continuing forward. It's obviously, come a long ways from when it was first proposed. So any other questions from the committee?
I was just kind of following up on John's question. Do you think the governor and the appropriate folks at the legislature understand that we're not comfortable with this? Don't really like the idea?
I had coffee with the chair of the Section F Budget Subcommittee. That's the Long Range Building Committee, and I've shared with him our personal our opinions on the matter. So it's being communicated to the folks whose committees who have jurisdiction over things like this. I think at some point in the future, we'll have to make a stronger statement, but we've got a whole calendar year before the next legislative session. And I want to be careful about how we do that, because we don't want to tell the governor and the legislature, don't tell us what to do. That never goes over well. But I think relaying in a positive way, you have other mechanisms by which you can do this that don't lean on the BOI. Let's look at those first. But that's going to be a delicate conversation.
Yeah, makes sense.
Never goes over well when you tell somebody, don't tell me what to do.
It's always entertaining though.
Yeah, no, it's fun to watch. Anywho, any other questions, Mr. Chair?
None from me. Any from the board? If not, there is a motion that Dan has lined out in the materials. And I would entertain a motion.
What Dan outlined, and he effectively made a motion, was to approve all of them in one motion. Can I do that, or do you want them separate?
This would just be the motion at the bottom of the tab 2 memo.
Oh, okay. Okay. Then, Mr. Chairman, I would move the executive director be authorized to purchase land for construction of a behavioral health facility pursuant to House Bill 5, subject to approval of the Office of Budget and Program Planning.
Perfect. Thanks, Cindy. Is there a second? We got a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Not. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. All right, thanks, Dan. Is there anything else?
Only thing I'll offer is at the conclusion of the meeting, if folks want to stay on for another 10 minutes, I'll do a quick training on the Remarkables and how to plug along and do some button pushing. I know it's been a little bit of a painful process, but we'll try to get some training. We'll also, we've gotten more information out more ways, but obviously we need you guys to have the materials and be able to use the tools. So I know Porter's wanted a little bit of, what buttons do I push on this? So afterwards, I'll be happy to do that for a little bit.
Great.
Thanks, Dan. Just to clarify on the connection, is it predominantly me that seems to be delayed in communicating here?
Yeah.
Yes.
Dan, do we want to, okay, obviously. Do we want to take a short break? We seem to have got back on track here. Maybe I can disconnect and reconnect.
Sure.
And
we'll just take 5 minutes.
The connection might be a little crisper. Yeah, that works for me.
Okay. See you in a sec. Way better.
Okay.
I'm going to quickly share my screen. We've been working on the newsletter that the board asked for. RVK gave us some prompts. We built some prompts. We're using Perplexity AI to create it. Here is the draft for the first edition. And so every month you'll get this. But it'll be a monthly executive summary based on the prompts we've gotten so far. And then it'll pull the top headlines relating to U.S. sovereign wealth funds, Western sovereign wealth funds, defined benefit pension plans, state investment pools. So this will be going out monthly. If there's something you would like us to add to the prompts, feel free to ship that to us. We're still trying to figure out how to get the the citations included so that you can just click on this on the headline and get the citations for the top headlines. But we're getting there, and you should have your first official for January.
Hey, thank you, Dan. That's great. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Maybe the only thing I was thinking is like top items from P&I would be good, and topics, consultants, pensions, and then maybe I think you already said that you were going to include, or in the letter I think I saw you write. Forgive me, I think you said that there's you'll do like a market snapshot or something like that's great. I think it's more the pension, the consultant, the kind of information. It'd be really helpful.
Okay. The only thing I'd add is we've got to be careful on copyright and trademark, so we can't pull directly unless we've got.
Sure.
So that's the weirdness about it, but we'll definitely add some prompts on there for those.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Dan. Any other questions on that topic? All right. If not, I believe we're ready to move on to tab 3, the Montana Loan Program. So, Doug, do you have an update for us?
Good morning, board members. Yeah, we have the commercial and residential loan portfolio I'll do a review on. The participation loan program has an outstanding balance of a little over $98 million as of October 31st. That's 47 loans with a yield of 3.02%. We have 2 reservations, a little over $6 million, and 1 committed loan, a little over $7.9 million. No past due loans in the portfolio whatsoever. The infrastructure loan program has a balance of a little over $8 million. That's 8 loans. Return is 3.85%. And 1 committed loan for almost $3.7 million. The intermediary relending program has a balance of almost $5.4 million. That's 40 loans. The yield is 2%. There is 1 committed loan for $250,000, which is in the process of closing. So that'll come off of there. The science and tech portfolio has a balance of almost $254,000. That's just 1 loan. The yield is 7.5%. The Montana Facility Finance Authority has a balance of a little over $13 million. That's 18 loans with a yield of 3.7%. The residential loan portfolio has a balance of almost $890,000. It's 28 loans. It's 6.19% return on that portfolio. 2 loans over 90 days past due that total $60,000. Both of those loans have FHA guarantees on them. The Montana Down Payment Assistance Program has a balance of almost $77 million. That's 134 loans. Repayment of those loans begin in January of 2027. And then finally, the residential owned cooperative loan program, we've got one committed loan. It's almost $1.9 million. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Are there any questions for Doug? Okay, hearing none. Thanks, Doug. Moving on to tab 4, the municipal loan program. Louise.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. Got a little wordy during the audit committee, so I'll just keep this really short for us. Tab 4, municipal loan program. We have two things here to cover: the InterCap program and also the MHIR, or the Housing Bond Program portfolio. Just some brief updates. Usually the first and second quarters for these programs are pretty quiet. For the InterCap program, things start picking up usually in spring and also summer. So right now we have the outstanding as of the first quarter end of 63 million. Currently that has gone up to 71 million, so it has increased from there. We also have our repayments will be coming in here for the February 15th. Those start rolling in usually about January, so we were getting a little low in funds on that, so we did it in advance recently. In the report here, the first quarter is outstanding for the bond that we use is 65 million, but we've advanced about 2 million on that to keep our funding steady. Our auto pay is going up. This quarter end was 93%, and currently that's at 95%. So we're moving along with getting more and more of those loans set up for auto pay. We also have, what we have here is the staff approved loans. If there are any questions on the staff approved memo or the activity summary. Okay,
Any
seeing none, we can move.
questions?
Oh, sorry.
No, I do have one question. So the current bond rate, 4.32, you guys revisit this, reissue this bond in February, or potentially adjust the rate in February of each year. Do you have any expectations on where the InterCap rate may go? I guess just based on where the current 1 year is at about a 360 or so. So do you expect, if rates hold there, that we'd see a decline in the InterCap rate?
I think so. It just really depends on how the market's going to shake out in February on that 1-year treasury. So as you said, it's sitting about 3.62. So if we were to apply the same as we did last year, or what's valid right now, we're looking about 4.5. Currently we're at 5. So we'll see. And of course, this all depends on the market and doing our cash flow for the years, how that rate will shake out.
Okay, thanks.
Good question. But
Louise, I have another question. This is Maggie.
sure.
On a Hot Springs School District, it's a cash flow loan. I've never heard of such a thing. So what's the purpose? I mean, I understand cash flow, obviously, but is it because they're waiting for cash to come in from taxes, whatever other sources?
Yes, that is correct. So it's really used as a and they can do it by statute. So cities, towns, school districts, they can do this cash flow loan. And that's in anticipation of tax revenues coming in or other revenues coming in. They do have to pay it off within the fiscal year they borrow it. So it's really kind of a bridge to get them through the slow tax receipt time. And so Hot Springs needed to do that this year.
Thank you.
You bet. Okay, seeing no other questions, we can move on to just a brief update for the Montana Housing Infrastructure Revolving Bond Program portfolio. There have been no new commitments in this program. It is paying on time. The loan is current and it's sitting at $2 million $10,419. So that is all we have to report for the municipal loan programs.
Thanks, Louise. So on the Montana Housing Infrastructure Revolving Program, have we seen, there's no new commitments, but have we seen any other interest in this program as of late?
Not as of late. The last ones we've had was in the Missoula County area, that Y area. They're just a little farther out in the progress that they're making to get to the point of sending in an application, but we could eventually.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for Louise? If not, all right, let's move on to tab 5, the MPARA and TRS relationships. I believe we have representatives from both, so maybe we'll start with MPARA.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for having me this morning. I'm going to share my screen for the presentation contained at this tab 5, and I will walk us through it to share the valuation results. Bear with me for just a moment. And I'm hoping everyone can now see my screen.
Yep.
Looks good.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chair, members of the board, good morning. For the record, my name is William Hollahan, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Montana Public Employee Retirement Administration. I'd like to thank the board for providing me with the time to provide our fiscal year 25 statutorily required valuation results for the defined benefit plans that we administer at MPARA. And again, I'll be working off the presentation in front of you and in your packet at tab 5. So we can jump right into the presentation and slide 2. And the first slide is really just introductory, and what it does is explain the purpose of our yearly valuation process, which is to provide a financial checkup of the defined benefit plans that we administer at MPARA, and to provide a snapshot and a baseline for evaluating the sufficiency of contributions coming into a defined benefit plan and the status or the funded status of a pension plan. And this valuation process is used to develop strategies to systematically fund the promised benefits of a defined benefit pension system so that there's always enough money in the plan to pay the benefit obligations that are owed. And the valuation process does this overall by measuring the assets and liabilities of a defined benefit system in order to determine whether current contribution rates are sufficient to fund each defined benefit plan that we administer. And this is really done in one way only, and that is through the measurement of each system's amortization period. And then after this, our actuary analyzes experience in each plan, which are the economic and demographic assumptions used to value each plan. And then finally, this is all put together in final reports that are fully accessible on our website. We can move on to the next slide. Next slide shows our basic retirement funding equation for our defined benefit plans. And what it does is explain concisely how defined benefit plans are meant to work and how they have worked in Montana for the last 80 years. You can see from this slide, contributions plus investments must equal benefits plus expenses. And what the slide's really meant to show is the value of saving and investing. On the left-hand side of the equation, you have the investment side, which is comprised of statutory contributions and investment income. And on the right-hand side are the benefit payments and administrative expenses of running each plan, which are the liabilities to be paid by the plan. And the reason why we have an actuary conduct such a yearly valuation is to estimate this right-hand side of this equation for us in terms of future benefit payments and expenses. And then we compare these forecasts with our assets, which are, of course, our contributions and investment income. So for a pre-funded system such as PERS, this equation is in balance over the long-term lifetime of the fund. And I'd like to point out here that with this equation, 60 to 70% of each defined benefit payment made by one of our plans is derived from investment income earned on assets within the plan. Move on to the next slide, number 4, and this will begin my comments on the fiscal year 25 valuation results for the largest pension system we administer, PERS. I'll begin on the left-hand side of this slide. So in 2025, the market return on PERS assets returned an average of 9.39% versus our assumed rate of 7.3%. And the actuarial asset returns averaged a return rate of 5.44% versus our assumption of 7.3 again. So at the close of fiscal year 25, the market value of PERS assets held in the consolidated asset pension pool is $184 million more than the actuarial value of assets. And you may be asking, why are these numbers different? Well, it's due to the fact that our retirement board, uses a 4-year smoothing methodology to smooth in investment gains earned over our assumption of 7.3% and losses earned under our assumption over a 4-year period to arrive at the actuarial value of assets. So we don't take the full market value of assets and base the valuation results off of that value, but rather recognize 1/4 of the loss or gain in the year it's incurred, and then for the next 3 years, an additional 1/4 is phased into the plan to arrive at this number. So essentially, we are saving some gains right now. You're not seeing them in the plan. We're saving these and we're smoothing them into the plan using that 4-year methodology over the next 3 years. And in fact, if we were to have based the valuation results off the market value of assets in PERS without any smoothing, the system would be 76.3% funded and would be amortizing its unfunded liabilities in 20 years. So smoothing cuts both ways. Now, if we turn our attention to the second column listed on this slide, overall, we experienced a $212 million experienced loss in PERS this year. And this loss is derived from the last year of recognition of fiscal year 22's negative 4.2% rate of return that we recognized as part of our 4-year smoothing process. And that loss totaled $133.9 million. And that is why you see a 4-year smooth actuarial return average of 5.4%, which is 186 basis points less than our assumption. In addition, there was also a loss to the plan due to salary increases being higher than anticipated across the board in PERS of $73.8 million. And more specifically, we had a covered payroll increase of 7.2% from last year, which far outpaced our growth assumption of 3.25%. And then a very small component of this experience loss was also comprised of a demographic and mortality experience loss of $5 million, which is less than 0.005% of the total liabilities of the plan. So a very small loss here. And salary increases, such as the ones that we saw in the plan, do come with liability increases, but they also come with a total payroll increase. And that's good because that means our total contributions are more than we anticipated. And this, along with strong investment performance this year, and the continued recognition of a cheaper benefit tier created 12 years ago, are the main reasons why the amortization period for the plan dropped by 4 years from 27 to 23 years. And then turning our attention to the bottom of column 2 on this slide, these numbers demonstrate the $184 million actuarial investment gain we anticipate experiencing during the next 3 years in our PERS plan using our 4-year smoothing process. And more specifically, so long as we hit our 7.3% rate of return each year, we will recognize an $82.1 million gain in fiscal year 26, followed by a gain of $64 million in 27, and thereafter followed by a gain of $37 million in 28. If we turn our attention to the last 2 columns of the slide, you'll note that you can see the funded ratio for the plan ticked down just slightly from 75.7% to 74.4%. We were anticipating that the funded ratio would tick down slightly this year because of the recognition of those asset losses I just spoke to. But on a very positive note, the system dropped its amortization period by 4 years from 27 to 23. And this is actually the lowest amortization period the system has had in roughly 20 years, going back prior to the financial crisis of 2008 to the year 2007. All right, we can move on to the next slide here. Slide number 5, this bar graph shown on this slide shows our active and retired membership in PERS, and it provides a historical look back over the last 18 valuation years. And the active members in light blue have stayed relatively stable over the last 15 years, and this population has increased at about a rate of 0.5% per year over this time horizon. And of course, we have our retirees noted by the dark blue line on this chart, which are part of our aging population that is increasing. Now, a gradual increase in retirees, which we see on this chart, is anticipated for any mature pension system such as ours, which was established in 1945. Overall, we have just about 31,000 active members and just over 26,000 retirees participating in the plan. So this equates to about 0.9 retirees for every 1 active member of the PERS plan. You can see 18 years ago, we had 0.6 retirees for every 1 active member, and now we have 0.9 retirees. And as PERS is a mature plan, we do expect this ratio to continue to increase and likely stabilize at about a 1-to-1 ratio. Move on to the next slide. Number 6, and this slide compares PERS average salary of our active member population and average benefits paid to our retirees within the plan over the last 18 years. And you can see the average salary has increased over this time period, with slight increases in the average monthly benefit paid as well. So this year, the average salary of an active PERS member increased by 6.5% over last year and sits at roughly $54,000. And looking back to 2008, the average salary within the plan has increased at about a rate of 2.6% per year. And then finally, I note an increase of 3.2% in terms of the average yearly benefit paid to retirees over last year, with the average annual benefit amount sitting at $22,676 for a PERS retiree, which marks an increase over last year of about $700. Moving on to the next slide, number 7. This slide demonstrates total PERS covered payroll in red and benefits paid in green on this graph for the last 18 years. And it shows that total covered payroll for this system over this period has generally continued to grow. This past year, we did experience an increase in covered payroll of about 113 million from the previous year. And this was mainly due to a roughly 200 plus member increase in our active population, as well as an average increase of 6.5% in average salary from last year to this year, which produced a 7.2% overall increase in total covered payroll for the system from fiscal year 24 to 25. And so looking at this top red line, this is where our growth assumption comes into play. And this assumption is looking at that top red line, and it's expecting it to grow at that 3.25%. And when it does do that, like it did this year, and actually exceeds the assumption by 4%, it shortens the system's amortization period to pay off unfunded liabilities, because we're bringing in more cash in the form of contributions off of that covered payroll than we expected to that can be paid towards those unfunded liabilities of the plan. And then dropping down to the bottom, during fiscal year 25, you'll note at the green line about 594 million in PERS benefits were paid, which marks an increase of roughly 25 million from last year. Moving on to the next slide, number 8. This slide shows the historical value of assets for the PERS system on both a market and an actuarial value going back to 2008. The market value of assets is represented by the dark blue bars going up on this graph, and the actuarial, or that smooth value of assets I previously spoke to, is represented by the red line. And so again, to come to that actuarial value of assets, we smooth in gains and losses over a 4-year period to arrive at that number. So for this past year, we're sitting at an actuarial asset value of roughly $7.5 billion in assets in PERS, with a market value of roughly $7.6 billion in assets. So the actuarial value of assets and the market value of assets are on relatively equal footing. And again, this is due to the fact that we experienced positive investment performance above our assumption this year of 9.39%, which was 209 basis points more than we expected, with a quarter of this $148 million investment gain being realized by the plan this first year, and then an additional quarter will be phased into the plan over the next 3 years. Next slide, number 9, demonstrates the specific funding results for the PERS system, and you can see the statutory funding rate for this valuation, combined employee and employer, was 17.07%. The top of this chart, you will see that the normal cost rate for the PERS system decreased. Now, the normal cost rate is the portion of the total statutory contribution rate each year that must be set aside to fund for future benefits of active members of the PERS plan. And this number came down by roughly 54 basis points from last year, from 9.83% to 9.29%. And it's reflective of new active employees coming into the system under the less expensive new benefit tier with a sliding scale GABA created in 2013. And this difference between these two numbers represents the additional amount of employer contribution rate that can be used to pay down and amortize the unfunded liabilities of this plan. And again, as a direct result of this positive development, the amortization period of the plan dropped 4 years, from 27 to 23 years, to pay off its unfunded liabilities, because we're able to use more of that total contribution rate coming into the plan towards those liabilities, and therefore we're scheduled to pay them off faster. And turning our attention to the bottom 5 rows of this slide, you'll note that the overall assets of the plan went up by 113 million, but total liabilities did increase more by about 300 million, again as a result of the deferred experience losses for the plan that I previously spoke to on slide 4. And that led to an increase in the system's unfunded liabilities by about 197 million. And as a result of this, you can see the funded ratio for the plan came down just slightly for this year's valuation, again from 75.7 to 74.4. Now, this unfunded liability increase is not atypical, nor does it mean the plan is underfunded in any way. This increase is merely reflective of the last year of recognition of an $837 million investment loss the plan experienced in 2022 as a result of that negative 4% rate of return. But keep in mind, PERS is 75% funded with a 75% down payment on its 50-year plus liabilities. Moving on to the next slide. This slide shows our progress towards 100% funding in the PERS system, and what's depicted here through the orange arc is the positive amortization gain the plan experienced this year from last year. And more specifically, it displays that PERS will amortize its unfunded liabilities in 23 years in the year 2047 and be 100% funded so long as we meet our assumptions moving forward. And you can compare this arc with the blue one on this graph representing last fiscal year's valuation results showing an amortization period of 27 years. The next slide, number 11, I will cover the valuation results for all of the other defined benefit systems that we administer at Impera, and specifically our judges system, our highway patrol officer system, our sheriff system, our game wardens and peace officers plan, our municipal police officer system, our firefighters unified retirement system, and our volunteer firefighters compensation act. Now, if we turn our attention to the first column listed on the slide, in 2025, overall, we had a $91.6 million experience loss across all of these other defined benefit plans that we administer. And the two biggest components of this loss were the last year of recognition, like PERS, of that negative 4.2% rate of return that we recognize as part of our 4-year smoothing process, which totaled a $41 million loss, as noted in the second column. And in addition, there was also a loss across these plans due to salary increases being higher than anticipated across the board. And that loss totaled $40 million, as noted by the fourth column. And more specifically, we had an average covered payroll increase of 7.22% from last year to this year for these plans, which again far outpaced our assumption of 3.25%. And if we turn our attention to the third column, a very small component of this experience loss was also comprised of a demographic and mortality experience loss of $10 million. Now, if we turn our attention to the bottom of column 2, these numbers reflect the $65 million actuarial investment gain we anticipate experiencing during the next 3 years using the board's 4-year smoothing process. And more specifically, so long as we hit our rate of return assumption for these plans, we will recognize a $28 million gain in 26, followed by a $23 million gain in 27, and thereafter followed by a $13 million gain in 28. The next slide, number 12, just provides a summary for you of the specific valuation numbers of all of these plans. So if we start at the top of this chart, the judges' retirement system remains extremely well funded at 184% with no unfunded liabilities, but rather a $65 million asset surplus. Our highway patrol system sits at 76% funded with a 22-year amortization period, down from 24 years in last year's valuation. Our sheriff system sits at 82% funded, and it decreased its amortization period by 7 years from 24 to 17. Our game wardens and peace officers retirement system sits at 92% funded, and it decreased its amortization period by 8 years from 24 to 16. Our municipal police officer system sits at 75% funded, and its amortization period remains at 18 years. Our firefighter system sits at 84% funded, and its amortization period remains in single digits at 8 years. And finally, our Volunteer Firefighters Compensation Act plan, which is we administer as a IRS qualified length of service award plan, sits at 101% funded with no unfunded liabilities to amortize, but rather a $365,000 asset surplus. All right, this brings us to the last slide I'll cover, and this is a slide that just covers upcoming work that will be conducted as part of our actuarial process during the interim, and more specifically, the Public Employees Retirement Board will have an actuarial experience study conducted by its actuary and presented to the board in May of 26. This study is going to review the economic and demographic assumptions adopted by our board that are used to project the costs and liabilities of the defined benefit plans it administers. And so using a 4-year look-back period of July 1st, 2022 through June 30th of 25, our actuaries are going to compare the actual experience of each plan with what was expected to happen under its current assumptions during that 4-year period. And the economic assumptions that will be reviewed consist of the adopted price inflation, investment return, wage inflation, and payroll growth assumptions, as well as the board's adopted demographic assumptions to include mortality and retirement rates. Mr. Chair, members of the board, that concludes my quick summary of the valuation results for the board. I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the board?
Hi, Jeff.
Yes, go ahead.
Hey, Bill. John Milanovich, board member. I'm sorry. I think this might be the first time I've heard, I've seen the presentation, and I know a lot of the other board members are much more familiar with it than I am. Do you mind just taking a step back and kind of discussing the relationship between Impera and the board? And I know that we manage the funds, but just you guys are management of the distribution, correct? And can you go over that just a bit?
That's correct, John. Good question. We are governed by a 7-person fiduciary board that oversee our operations. Largely, we run the day-to-day operations of disbursements for retirement benefits, tracking everyone that is an active state employee. And then for our DC and 457 plans, we set our investment lineup. Our DC plan obviously is a choice one makes. But that's our general governance structure. No, we are not investing anything ourselves here. Obviously, by constitutional fiat, you guys are doing that for us.
And when we look at the rate where it says member employer total, do you mind just looking at either page 12 or page, I think it was in one other one as well, right? Could you, I guess just page 12, could you describe to me what that, is that saying that 13% of the employees for HPORS, for example, are just describe that to me. What do the rates mean?
Sure. What's listed here are the contribution rates listed in statute.
Oh, okay.
So, for your example, the Highway Patrol Officers Retirement System has a 13.05% employee contribution rate off of their pay, and then their employer is paying 38.43.
Awesome. And when you think of DC versus DB here, what would be the percentage of the employees who are entirely DB, defined benefit versus defined contribution?
Yeah, we've got about 31,000 active DB members and about 5,500 active DC members. So, doing some quick math in my head, which I can't do right now, but it's I got you. It's great. Not nearly large of an adoption rate among our DC plan as our DB plan.
Sure. Thank you very much, Bill. Nice to meet you.
Absolutely.
All right. Do we have any other questions? If not, again, thank you for the update. Appreciate the insight and the report. Let's move on to TRS. Mr. Graham.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Just checking in real quick. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. I will share my screen. And while that's coming up here, well, actually, can you see my screen?
Yep.
All right, perfect. All right, before I jump into this, I guess I'll just explain real quickly based on the last question. The teachers' retirement system covers teachers, school administrators, and paraprofessionals, anyone involved in an educational service capacity for all the public school districts in Montana, as well as we have some members in a few state agencies, and then of course we have the community colleges and some county superintendents. So that's basically who we cover. I won't repeat the same things that Director Holohan already spoke to these first 3 slides. So I'll jump to slide 4, and we'll start with the asset return. Obviously, we're both invested in caps, so our market rate of return and actuarial rate of return are going to be very similar to one another. You can see there in the first column, our market rate of return was a little over 2% higher than our 7.3 expected rate of return, our actuarial assumption. However, our actuarial rate of return for the year, because we had to factor in FY 2022's negative 4%, ended up being 5.46%. So it was 1.84% less than what was expected. Our market value of assets are 128 million more than the actuarial value of assets. And that experience is recognized over a 4-year period, as Mr. Holohan stated. You can see there, looking forward after this year, all we have are actuarial gains to recognize. So provided that the current fiscal year we're in ends up 7.3 or higher, we will definitely be chewing into that unfunded liability. Next slide. Again, our market value of returns was 9.4. The actuarial was 5.5. Our unfunded liability increased slightly due to that actuarial rate of return by just over 100 million. Our funded ratio decreased slightly, less than 1% on an actuarial basis. However, if we were using the market value of assets, our funded ratio actually would have went up. Our amortization period held steady at 21 years. On an actuarial basis. If we were to use the market value of assets, it would be 19 years. So all that indicates, provided that we at least come close to hitting our assumption this year, the next few years are going to be good for us. Similar to Ampera, our active and retired membership are, actually TRS was established in state law in 1937. So we are a mature plan. This is normal and expected. We had 1.5 active members per retiree 15 years ago. And in FY 25, we have 1.1 active member per retiree. Again, nothing wrong with that. It's to be expected. We currently have about 20,000 active members and about just over 18,000 retirees in the system. Average salary and benefits, similar to Ampera, but not quite as much. Our average salary went up by 4.6% in 2025 for our active members, which is greater than the 3.25% assumption, but not quite to the extent Ampera's did. Our benefits actually went up a little bit less than they have on average for the past few years, which is good for the system. The less we pay out in benefits, the more we have for you all to invest and make money for us. Payroll and benefits, you can see TRS is a very stable system. Our benefit payments are very predictable. They go up by roughly the same percentage each year. And our salaries for our full-time members are also very predictable and go up by about the same percent each year. Moving on to assets. All this graph shows you is the orange line is the actuarial value of assets. And you can see in 2021, when we had the 27% return, since we smoothed that over a 4-year period, our actuarial value was considerably less than the market value. However, for most years, they are very close to one another. And you can see in 2025, our actuarial value was slightly less than the market value, which was already explained. So this slide shows you the actuarial assets, which is the blue bars, right, versus the unfunded actuarial accrued liability, which is the orange bars. You can see that our assets have been growing at a much faster rate than our unfunded liabilities. Our unfunded liabilities, you can see where they go up, then they go down for a few years, then they go up, then they kind of, we've been holding steady, or they go down a little bit. And most of the time where you have a change from like 16 to 17, where they were down here and then they go back up, it's because we adopt new assumptions as a result of those experience studies. So our assumptions have gotten more conservative over time. And by conservative, I mean, when I started this position, our assumed rate of return was 7.75%. We reduced it to 7.5, and then more recently we reduced it to 7.3%. So this is all actually very good news. I mean, we are chewing into those unfunded liabilities, and as Mr. Holohan stated, being 74 or 5% funded means we have 74 or 5% of every dollar that we're projected to need, over the next 50 plus years. So it's really, we're pre-funding this system. The funding results, you can see, I guess the thing I would point out here in the teacher's retirement system, between the member contribution and the employer contribution, we have about 9.31% of the total that goes directly to pay off our unfunded liability. So we are making headway on that. Again, our funded ratio 73%, our amortization period 21 years. Progress toward 100% funding. You can see the current valuation is orange. The previous years was blue. And again, we stayed right at 21 years, so they end up at essentially the same spot there. As far as going forward, House Bill 924 passed the legislature, and it actually will increase the employer contribution by 0.1% each year for 20 years, beginning in fiscal year 28. That will also help to fund the system on a quicker. In addition to that, and you all probably know as much or more about this than I do, the state established a pension reserve fund with the potential for transfers to TRS and Impera if our inception to date return falls below the assumed rate of return for 2 consecutive years. Of course, our actuary is going to assume that we're going to hit our return assumption. So there's no assumption built into our valuation for any transfers. However, it is there as a rainy day fund of sorts if we ever find ourselves in a position where we need it. Looking ahead, similar to Impera, we also will be conducting an experience study this spring where they will look at the previous 5 years experience and recommend any changes that they think are necessary to my board, which will take them under consideration for adoption. With that, Mr. Chair, before we take questions, I'd like to thank the board and Director Villa and his staff for all of your efforts. You guys do a great job for us. I can tell you your staff's very professional. The ones I work with, they're always responsive, and they provide us all the information that we feel like we need. With that, I'll take any questions that the board might have.
Thanks for the update and the report. Are there any questions? All right, I don't think we have any questions for you, so thank you very much for presenting, and it's always good to hear from you guys, and thanks for the compliments for the staff as well.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, I'd just like to echo Sean's sentiment. It is an absolute pleasure working with your board, your executive director, your chief investment officer, and all of your staff. We have a great relationship, and thoroughly enjoy it.
Thank you very much. All right, next item on the agenda, tab 6, investment policy statements.
All right, Mr. Chairman, we've got 4 for you today. I'll take the first 2, then the CIO will take the third, and I'll take the fourth. The first 2 relating to policy 30.300, Chief Operating Officer, Deputy Director, and 90.300, Executive Director Continuity. We're simply striking reference to a Deputy Director and fully acknowledging a COO position.
All right, so any questions in regards to the recommended investment policy statement for policy 30.300?
You need a motion, Mr. Chairman?
I do.
I would move to approve the revisions to policy 90.300 and 30.300 as shown.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I second that.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. Any other discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, motion passes.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, policy 40.204, as you will recall from the last board meeting, we talked about adding a secondary benchmark to the private investments asset class. And so just memorializing that here in this investment policy. We have been working with RVK and State Street to implement this. It's been a little bit more challenging than we probably anticipated up front, is we need to break out some of the private equity, private credit stuff that we didn't in the historical returns, but we are working on that and fully expect to have that ready for you at the February board meeting. But memorializing that here in the policy statement. Happy to take questions.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions?
Hey, John, thank you very much. Hi, it's John Milanovich. John, thank you. I'm excited to see that. It has not been incorporated yet, right? Because when I went into the private section of the private equity section in February is what you're saying.
That's correct. We
then
wanted to make sure that we have an apples to apples comparison here with what Cambridge has for us. And that involves going back a number of years and making sure we break out the private credit versus the private equity return streams.
So could you describe that just a little bit? Will it be private equity year by year as a vintage year analysis, or is it then private credit by year as well? Is that kind of the theory, or?
I mean, you'll see it in the board book, similar to what you see currently with the various benchmarks, but under the hood, yes, we would have those different return streams broken out so that where there are differences, we can explain what's going on.
What are the names of the indexes? Just, I mean, like, is it Cambridge Private Equity 2020 vintage?
I will defer to Paige on that, as RVK is the one actually providing that.
Oh, okay, great.
Paige.
Hi, John. The names of the indexes, so it's the Cambridge Private Equity Index and the Cambridge Private Credit Index. So they're at the index level, they're rolling up all of the vintage years into one high-level index that we'll be pulling in for the comparison.
Can we see a breakout? I mean, when we do that, it'd be nice to kind of have a breakout by vintage year too, just to like even have a second page, a one-off page that just shows a breakout by vintage year of the index, not necessarily the performance, but just the index. It would be neat to see that, truthfully.
Yeah, I would need to look at that and get back to you to see if we have that capability.
Thank you.
Of course.
All right, any other questions in regards to policy statement 40.204? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
I so move to adopt the private investment class investment policy statement.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
We got a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. All right, next one.
All right, Mr. Chairman, policy 70.750, Montana Housing Infrastructure Revolving Loan Fund. Current policy has a maximum guarantee of $10 million per bond issued. This proposal would change it to 10% of the funds in the Montana Housing Infrastructure Revolving Loan Fund. That mirrors the language we use in the commercial loan policy. That is a percentage of available funds as opposed to a hard dollar cap. This will not only make it a little more consistent across the agency, but also more useful to the potential borrowers. Happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for Dan?
To recommend, right?
What's that?
Your recommend, right? It's a
yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. I so move.
Got a motion from member Milanovich. Is there a second?
I'll
second, Mr. Chair.
All right, we got a second. Thank you. Any other discussion? Not. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Opposed? Hearing none. Motion passes. All right. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to tab 7. So RVK. Floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Give me 1 second. Can you all see that all right? Thumbs up. Awesome.
Yep, we're good.
So today I'll be reviewing performance for the third quarter of 2025. I'm sure everyone's on the edge of their seats today. We have a big Federal Reserve meeting occurring today. It's the last time the Fed is meeting this year. And the general consensus is that we're going to get a third rate cut coming through in the amount of 25 basis points. So as a reminder of the Federal Reserve action that's happened this year, we did see a rate cut occur at the September meeting as well as the October meeting. And this would be the third rate cut coming in the amount of 25 basis points as well. So we will find out in 1 hour the decision that's made there. But looking at the performance for the third quarter of 2025, I'm going to focus on that market performance box on the lower left-hand portion of the screen here. You can see we have all black numbers, which means we saw broadly positive performance from all of the major asset classes. So we really have had a reversal. If you think back to when we were reviewing second quarter performance, we did have a dip in the markets back in April. And really ever since we had that correction, things have been up and up in the equity markets and elsewhere. So to run through a few of those performance numbers that are shown here, the S&P 500 index representing large cap US equities, returning 8.1% in the third quarter, bringing that total to about 15% for the year-to-date time period. The Russell 2000 index representing small cap US stocks, returning 12.4% for the third quarter of 2025, and about 10% for that year-to-date time period. We did see the MSCI EAFE index representing developed international equities return 4.8% in the third quarter, with a year-to-date return of 25%. So one thing to highlight here, we did see another reversal with US equities outperforming international equities in the third quarter. However, international equities continue to be the top performing asset class when we look out to that longer year-to-date time period. I'm going to flip down to the Bloomberg US Aggregate Bond Index here, representing US fixed income, a positive return of 2% for the quarter and about 6% for that year-to-date time period. Lastly, I'll pull out the NCREIF Odyssey Index that is representing core real estate here, with a positive return of 0.7% for the quarter and a positive return of 2.8% for the year-to-date time period. So all things being said, it's hard to pick out really a weak spot in asset class performance at this point in time. And we're keeping a close eye on to see how all these indexes finished throughout the end of the year. That being said, so I kicked off by talking about the Fed is probably going to cut rates by 25 basis points today. Your question might be, if everything's going so well with the market performance, why would the Fed be talking about a rate cut? So I would look over to the economic indicators for a little discussion around that. Broadly speaking, the economic indicators coming out have continued to be relatively strong. If you look at the unemployment rate, just around 3.4% as of the end of the third quarter of 2025, which is sitting below that median level that we've seen historically. CPI, again, which is what the Fed has their eye on when they're trying to balance that unemployment versus the inflation rate, has come down. While we're not quite at that 2% level that the Fed would like to see long term, we have seen inflation generally trend down. That being said, the federal government shutdown did throw a bit of a wrench in things. We had a pause on a lot of the economic data that came out in the months of October and November. So the Fed is flying blindly a little bit on the decision that they're making today. But again, general consensus is they would like to stay ahead of some of this data that they anticipate coming out. If you look at some of the corporate data that's been coming out, there has been some layoffs. There's been some talk about, less payroll openings. So that is, generally speaking, what is backing up the Fed making that decision that they will likely make today. So looking down at the Treasury yield curve, you can see the yield curve as of the end of September, represented by this green line here. So we do have a generally upward sloping yield curve. Again, you can see the short end of the curve sitting at that about 4% level, and higher on the long end of the curve here. And again, I think it's probably topical maybe to talk about this a little bit. So generally speaking, when we're looking at the yield curve, the Federal Reserve is going to be the body that more or less is going to set the short end of the yield curve. So the federal funds rate, that is the rate that they're looking at when they're looking at making these cuts or making increases if we're in a time period where that is occurring. So if the Fed were to vote to drop rates by 25 basis points today, we could more or less say that we're going to see the short end of the yield curve come down here as we look forward. However, when we look out to the long end of the yield curve here, so represented by these 20, 30-year treasuries that you see, it's really the supply and demand dynamics of the market that are setting the long end of the yield curve. And it's been really interesting to see how this story is played out. So although there's been downward pressure on the short end of the yield curve, we've actually seen the long end of the yield curve continue to creep up. So if I were to compare that green line again, representing the yield curve as of the end of September 2025, to the yellow line here, which is the same yield curve as of September 2024, we can see we've had an upward move on the long end of the yield curve. And that's really market participants saying they think there's enough factors going on that yields are going to need to increase on the long end of the curve for investors to continue to buy these bonds. So we actually have our special insert for this quarter. And this is just, further exploring that dynamic that's in place there. And what's shown here, so the FOMC, that's the Federal Open Markets Committee. They put out a dot plot, which is these blue dots that are shown on the screen here. And more or less, this is the different governors who sit on the FOMC. They're putting together their predictions and best guess where they think that short end of the curve is going to go over the next few years. So you can see generally the trend that the FOMC themselves is predicting is for that federal funds rate to continue to decline. So currently, they're projecting this rate between 3.5% and 4%, predicted to drop down to somewhere around 3% by, December 2029. It's interesting, however, to see that if you look at the 10-year Treasury forward rates, we actually have the opposite trend that's going on here. So we're currently sitting somewhere between 4 and 4.5% for that 10-year Treasury rate. Looking forward, you can see the market is actually pricing in that they think that 10-year forward rate is going to continue to increase. So why am I talking about this? I just think it's an interesting comparison to draw. It's definitely a talking point in the markets right now. And it's important to remember that although we might see further future federal rate cuts come through, we can't necessarily, translate that same factor that's going to apply when we're looking at forward rates in general. So while we might see rates on things like, money market funds, anything that's a short-term rate, come down in the near term, we continue to think that there's going to be healthy yields out of fixed income moving forward. I'm going to move forward to the quilt chart here. Again, this is a review of the annual asset class performance for all of the broad asset classes. We like to review this chart because it's a very good reminder that diversification is important and diversification as an investor matters. And the general theme when we look at the quilt chart is that it should be very hard to pick any kind of pattern out. So as we've been talking about for several years here, we have been living in a market environment where U.S. equity has been the dominant asset class. You can see for 2023 and 2024, this dark green box, which represents large cap U.S. equities, was the highest performing asset class. We have seen that trend reverse for the year to date in 2025. So actually all three of these top performing asset classes for 2025 year to date are international equity asset classes. So that's at the top there, we've got small cap international equity, followed by emerging markets equity, followed by large cap developed international equity. So again, just a good reminder of why we diversify across different asset classes, different geographic regions, to try and take advantage of the best opportunity set that we have at any given time. Again, it is notable that looking at this year-to-date column, every single number shown is positive. So generally speaking, we've been living in a very positive asset class environment. I will point out that real estate continues to be the lowest performing asset class with a year-to-date return of 2.8%. However, it's notable if I were to look back several calendar years, looking at starting in 2020, really. So the pandemic hits, we see real estate suffer a negative return of 8%, negative 2.5%. 2022 gets really ugly, negative 27%. I won't read all these numbers to you, but the point I'd like to make here is that we have seen core real estate start to recover, and we continue to think that these fundamentals are in a place for real estate to continue to look strong moving forward. And we seem to be out of the bottom trench of the damage that occurred in that asset class. I'm going to pause there, and I'm happy to take any general economic questions from the group before I dive into the specific Montana performance today.
Any questions for Paige? All right, just continue on. Thank you.
Perfect. So looking at page 5 here, this is the executive summary that we put together on a quarterly basis. So again, probably not surprising knowing that all asset classes had positive performance. Looking at the performance shown here, representative of PERS for the third quarter of 2025, we're showing a positive return of 4.1%. That's relative to a return of 5.6% for the benchmark. So we did see underperformance of about 1.5% relative to that benchmark, ranking the total fund in the 58th percentile relative to peers. So first and foremost, what drove that positive absolute performance for the fund? Really, all of the asset classes did contribute, but it was the strong positive returns from domestic equity and international equity that drove that strong performance for the quarter. When we're looking at relative to peers, again, we hesitate to make comparisons to peers on too short of a time period. We'll look at this later in the report, but the punchline here essentially is you are a little higher than your peers to real estate, which is what contributed to that below median rank for that quarter to date period. However, if I were to look out at these longer trailing time periods, again, I would hesitate to make a meaningful peer comparison for anything less than 3 to 5 years. So starting at the 5-year trailing time period, you can see that this total fund does rank just below the top quartile in the 28th percentile for 5 years, and ranking squarely in the top quartile for the trailing 7 and 10 years, with ranks relative to peers of 19 and 20%.
From a performance attribution standpoint, I mean, what is the leading cause of the lag between the index and the assumed index benchmark and the fund?
So yeah, I'm going to flip forward here and I can show you the data on that. So there's a few factors, but I'd say the two asset classes that are primarily contributing to that underperformance relative to the benchmark, you can see real assets lagging the benchmark by 7.2% in the third quarter, as well as private investments lagging the benchmark by approximately 6%.
Can you, or maybe John's going to expand on that down the road. Can you expand on that, or is that like for later?
Sure, happy to expand. So generally the trend that we see here, again, a reminder, the real assets benchmark is comprised of listed versions of the investments that you're investing in. So it's listed infrastructure, listed commodities, listed tips. So when you have a public liquid market that's experiencing this upswing that we've seen in markets in general, it's not abnormal for us to see a dispersion between the public version of that index and the private version of your investments that are not going to be marked to market as frequently.
So that's a 17% off the index. I mean, that makes sense. I appreciate that. But any other additional thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say it's not an abnormal problem. You know, all of your peers deal with the same issue and they're looking at benchmarking. Like I would make the same comment. I would hesitate to focus too much on any of those short-term time periods. It is interesting that if you were to look out to, and sorry, we don't have headers on the top of this page, we'll fix that. But if I were to look out to the trailing, this is the trailing 7-year column and the trailing 10-year column. You can see that that difference tends to wash out over time. So, you know, at the 5-year here, we've got a 51 basis point difference. At the 7-year, we're actually looking at nearly 2.5% outperformance relative to that index. So generally speaking, I would hesitate to draw any conclusions from that trailing quarter and year-to-date number, because as we know, when we have strong up or down markets, we are going to see that difference occur.
Sure, but there's also a liquidity premium with public, right? I mean, like, so we're taking a 2%. If we're outperforming by 2% or 200 basis points for illiquid over a 7-year period, that's kind of what's your opinion on that versus having the liquidity? You know, I mean, that doesn't seem like a huge premium, but you know, tell me.
Yeah, so I guess the way I think, like the hierarchy of how I would think through benchmarking, right, is first of all, we're trying to answer the question of, did the implementation of this asset class add value to your investment program? So if I were to look at real assets again and look at this trailing 5-year time period as an example, you can see that at an absolute level, the real assets program returned nearly 13%, which, looking at this page, is the highest performing asset class that you have for that particular time period. So I would say yes, right? The real assets program did add value. Secondary to that, and the same comments will apply to private investments, just to like broad blanket these statements. The secondary question that we're trying to answer is, when we implemented the real assets program, so that's the actual investments that I'm picking within the real assets program, right? How good of a job did I do relative to this stated benchmark of adding value? So again, sure, if you wanted to look at this and say for the year-to-date time period, had we been invested in, you know, liquid versions of these real assets, could we have done better? The answer would be yes, right, for this short time period. However, if I were to go back over to these longer trailing time periods, I can see that implementing the specific private investments that I did within the real asset class, I actually added a premium of about 2.5% over the listed versions of these benchmarks.
Right. And the question is, do you think that the 250 basis points increase is worth the illiquidity? I mean, I think, you know, real assets is something we're invested in, and it's great. But
Sure.
yeah, I was a little shocked to see this. And so I was just, what's the opinion there of the, I mean, the alternative would be to take an allocation via public, right? And over a 7-year period is 2.5%. I mean, I guess it doesn't matter for us because we're so long term. But
yeah, I'd say I don't know if it's a yes or no question, but to play ball, right? I think if I look at it, if I were maybe an investor who was in a position where liquidity was more of an issue, I might be more concerned, right? Because you are a long-term investor and you're able to take that long-term time horizon, generally speaking. And you'll see this with all of the asset classes where there's a public and a private version available. Take real estate as an example, right? You could buy listed REITs and be fully implemented in that, as opposed to core real estate. However, the data very strongly shows for all these asset classes that over any longer trailing time period, if you're able to take on that illiquidity, you will be in a better position long term.
And this is Becky, just adding to Paige's point, that 2.5%, 3% in that range for the additional return is what we've actually modeled in the asset allocation. You may recall as we went through that exercise. So we do believe when we're looking at the private expression of these investments, that does make sense over time, given that a plan has the ability to handle that illiquidity. And this is the same kind of exercise other plans go through is if I have sufficient liquidity in my plan and I don't allocate too much to private investments beyond what my liquidity needs are, then yes, those additional levels of return are very helpful in growing the assets. And the other thing is that it does provide diversification. It's different when you're looking at listed equity infrastructure versus private infrastructure. You're not getting as much equity diversification when you invest in listed infrastructure, but you're getting more full diversification when you do access the private markets.
Thanks, Becky. I also think, and just in general, right, like volatility does tend to erode wealth over time, and being able to decrease the volatility, the listed versions of a lot of these private asset classes have a lot of volatility associated with them. And anytime you're away from that, your investment program will be stronger in the long term.
Yeah, great answer. Thank you.
Of course. Let's see, where can I go back here? So we've covered a lot of this already. I'll go back and try and fill in the gaps at a high level here. So shown on page 6 here, what you have is a breakdown of the CAP assets. And again, when we're talking about the drivers of your performance, not surprising, you can see domestic equity does comprise the largest slice of your asset allocation here, followed by private investments in second and international equity in third. So having your top 2 highest performing asset classes for the quarter be 2 of your 3 top allocations, again, really contributed to that positive performance that we saw during the third quarter of 2025. I did want to point out, we've already looked at the dispersion with the real assets and the private investments. Again, while real estate continues to be in this recovery period, and it was one of the lowest returning asset classes for the quarter, your real estate programs in particular has been much more successful than that we've seen from peers and from the index itself. If you were to look at the real estate program compared to its benchmark here, looking out at the longer trailing time periods, you've seen annualized excess returns of 4.5%, almost 3%, almost 4%. So again, the implementation in place for your real estate program has been very strong compared to the benchmark in place that we've seen. Looking down, in addition to the asset classes you have shown here, just wanted to point out that the trust funds investment pool returned nearly 2% for the third quarter of 2025. And STIP, the short-term investment pool, returned 1.1% for the third quarter. Again, continue to see strong returns as we see those short-term rates in a very positive territory. And I'm going to flip forward and pull out a few pages from the quarterly report, and then I will give you the rest of your morning back. So flipping forward to page 4 here, what we have shown here is a breakdown of the retirement plans as of the end of the third quarter. So total assets sitting in the retirement plans at $16.4 billion. Again, you can see the 2 largest pools in the retirement plans are the PERS, representing 48% of assets, and TRS, representing 34% of the assets in that pool. We talked a little bit about this on page 9, but again, to drill into what is driving the differences in the ranks from your asset allocation relative to your peers. So at the bottom, you can see U.S. equity. You're actually sitting right at median. So compared to your peers, you're holding very similar amounts of U.S. equity as well as global equity. If we look over to fixed income, you rank in the 57th percentile relative to peers. So you do have a slightly lower allocation to both U.S. fixed income and non-U.S. fixed income relative to peers. Alternatives, and that's going to comprise your private investments and your real assets, You're sitting again right at median, 47% relative to peers. Where you do see the big difference relative to peers is a higher allocation to real estate, ranking in the 16th percentile. And you can see that's an allocation for you of 11.5% relative to a median allocation of a peers of about 7%. So when we do see that dispersion over the shorter time period ranks, that's really what's driving that difference relative to peers. However, again, we want to focus on those longer ranks, and this is a concept that we've looked at before, and I thought it might be a good opportunity to revisit. When we're looking at any shorter time period, take a calendar year as an example, the goal is never really to rank in the top percentile, not even the top decile. What we tend to see when we have a fund that is ranking that well or that poorly is you're taking a really, really large swing that can come around and hit you in the behind when you don't want it to. So really the goal is to rank above median for any of those time periods, and that is how you're going to end up ranking in the top quartile like you are at present over that trailing 10-year time period. And you can see this illustrated here, ranking in the 46th, the 42nd, the 36th, so on and so forth. None of this is a single digit number. And ultimately, when we go and look at that trailing 10-year time period, you can see that you are ranking well relative to your peers. Again, I think that was something like a 15th percentile rank for the trailing 10-year time period. And you've been able to take on less risk than your peers. So when I look at the plan sponsor scattergram here, this red line, both vertical and horizontal, represents the median return and the median risk for the peer group. You've been able to sit on the left-hand side of that risk, so you're taking on less risk than your peers with a higher return, which is the ideal placement to have on this chart. Again, let's not even focus on the benchmark because we know there are limitations to the private benchmarks we have in place. However, each of these gray dots represents one of your peers, and you can see that you're sitting well within that and in the ideal position left of the scattergram. So that is all that I planned to cover today. I'm happy to take any questions from the group on any economic data that you might want to circle back on or any of the performance pages in this broader performance report.
Are there any other questions for Paige or Becky? All right. Well, thank you for the presentation and appreciate you joining us.
Of course. Thanks everyone for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Moving on to tab 8, investment updates.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I'm sharing my screen here. A second. All right. So starting on slide 4 here, I won't spend too much time here. Paige did a good job of talking about the economic environment. As you know, we had the shutdown, which has delayed a lot of the government data. The Fed, as she mentioned, is meeting today, so we'll get to that in about a half an hour now. They are actually making that decision with somewhat of a lack of data. We're actually getting the November payrolls next week, as well as CPI next week. So they're lacking probably some important pieces, but expectation is that they do cut here. You'll see some information that I have on this slide that you probably haven't seen these types of sources before because we went to some things that we needed to since they were privately sourced information. I would say the two things that the market's probably focused on right now is job growth and retail sales. So thinking about, what's the actual job growth look like? So some of that information coming out next week will be pretty important. Retail sales, similarly, is the consumer holding up or not? One of the things that we've seen in some of the private data here is that the discretionary spend from consumers has gotten smaller. So those things like going to restaurants and things that are sort of optional, if you will, maybe a little bit less, whereas, spending on essential purchases has continued to increase, i.e. still some inflation out there, although dropping as Paige noted. So hoping that gets better over time, but some exciting stuff to see, I guess, in the coming weeks here. Moving to slide 5, just a chart from one of our managers that they sent out. Core CPI does appear to be moderating. We are still kind of above that 2% that the Fed would like to see. A lot of that drop has been driven by shelter, i.e. rents, finally kind of starting to trickle through the data and shrink a little bit, or at least not seeing the increases that we saw prior. So we're sort of on track to get to that 2% target that the Fed has, but we've got, a lot of different things going on there. Slide 6, I think it's notable, you probably heard about it in the press as well, that, that age of first-time home buyers has been increasing. So, harder for first-time home buyers to get into the market. That's important, for a number of reasons. Politically, I guess I'd say, everybody wants to feel like the American dream is still attainable and that you can get your own home. But aside from that, it's also a big driver in the economy, right? When somebody buys that first home, there's a lot of spending that goes along with that as well. So pushing that out does have some other implications. Now, hopefully we see that, kind of come back down over time, but TBD. Too far. Something that we've hit on a number of times, Jason has in particular in his talk, but I thought I would point it out here as well again, because it sort of continues to surprise, I guess, to some degree. I'm sure everybody's heard plenty about, the AI boom and is it a bubble or is it not a bubble? Don't know yet, I guess, is sort of the short answer. But if you look at that chart off to the right, I think one thing that's notable is you can see the top 10 companies that are in the index right now have been the drivers, as we've mentioned. And the earnings obviously have been very strong. That's that bottom green line there, the 32.5% increase. Obviously a very strong number, but their share price, their market cap has gone up even more. So it does suggest that pricing is outstripping earnings to a certain degree. Now, earnings may catch up and all of the prophecies of great things that are going to happen may come true. But again, that's a little bit, undecided. And I think the market's starting to get a little bit nervous about that. But nonetheless, it seems to look past it and continue to push higher.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
Forgive me. I was curious. Isn't there, if we go back, I mean, it's really interesting to look at that graph on the right, the weighted average, the weight of the top 10 companies.
Yeah.
Wasn't there a period of time like in the 60s or something where it was kind of similar? I mean, I remember the term Nifty 50, but when you look back historically, was there a similar time where such a small number, if we were to move that chart, say back to the 70s or 60s, and I don't know how applicable that is to learn lessons from, but do you remember a time that, or have you read about a time where it was that high? I don't recall, so that's why it's a question for you.
I think we've hit time. I don't have that data in front of me or anything, but I think we've hit that time periodically, and it's usually centered around new technologies. So I think the closest one that maybe is on this chart to a degree is, the internet boom and call it 99 to 01 type time frame. You saw similar types of things where people got very excited about new technology. You don't know, because it's new, you don't really have the track record there, and you can sort of forecast into the future, boundless optimism, I guess, if you will. And it's not that, I mean, I think we all know in retrospect that was a huge deal, right? I mean, the internet was a huge change and a huge productivity driver. However, that didn't work out too well at a certain point because people got overly optimistic about that. And then we sort of saw the crash in, 02 timeframe, where, some of that excitement came off. So I think, yes, I think that happens periodically. And I think that's what the market, or at least I'm thinking about in terms of it's not, is AI a thing or not? It clearly is. But are the earnings and the productivity and all of that goes with it, is that going to be recognized, in the time frame that the market expects right now, or is pricing just, run too high too fast? And, maybe it still plays out, but it plays out over 10 or 20 years instead of the next 3.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So moving to slide 8 here, assets under management by asset class. Nothing really to say too much here in particular, other than we did top 30 billion at the end of the quarter, which is the first time I think we have hit that mark for the overall assets that we manage. But breakdown here is pretty similar to what it's been in the past. By participant type, again, pretty much same thing you've seen over prior periods. The increase in the overall NAV, apologies on the, you can see it here, I guess, on the screen on the remarkable. It's a little bit hard to differentiate between some of the colors that we've got here, but no big change here. Maybe STIP declining just a little bit, but kind of hard to tell with the scale of things here. All things considered, sort of ticking along. Moving to pensions in particular, we are well within all of our approved asset class ranges here. Nothing really to call out in particular, kind of the same broad positioning we probably had over the last few quarters. Pension asset allocation. Again, I think this is the first quarter where we ticked up over 16 billion in the overall pension assets, but a similar sort of breakdown in terms of the holdings that we've got that you would have seen in prior quarters. Pension performance, is kind of noted by Sean and Bill. We have continued to, if you look over at kind of the 5-year and the 10-year numbers, which I always try to point you to more so, the increase in the overall assets has more than outstripped what we've had to pay out in benefits, which is a good place to be. So that continues to be very healthy. And obviously, even in this 1-year time frame, we had a good healthy number there, although that can vary certainly over different time frames, as you've seen in the past. It's not always positive in that shorter time frame. Overall performance, good performance overall time frames here, and well above our actuarial hurdle of 7.3% overall longer time frames. Fiscal year to date, as of Monday, I think it was, we're sitting at about 5.5%. So knock on wood, that continues. We're well on our way to meeting our actuarial hurdle again this fiscal year. Hopefully that will continue. Questions on pension before I jump into the non-pension stuff? All right, hearing none. So in the assets under management ex cap, again, be similar cast of characters here in terms of the pie chart that you see before you, a little under 14 billion there. STIP, continued good performance there. We did see kind of the peak of STIP in kind of the mid-June timeframe. I think we hit a little bit over 9 billion. That has subsequently come down a bit with real estate rebates, real estate tax rebates, and other things going on there. I guess some of it moving from the Go Trust into the trust fund pool. So we've seen a little decline in the overall size of STIP, but still pretty healthy balance there. Overall STIP performance has been very good. Obviously, Fed funds rate has been coming down a little bit as the Fed has cut rates. So if the current yield on STIP is right around 4.2% today, might come down a little bit more if we see the Fed cut rates again today. Still doing a good job here versus our benchmark. Questions on STIP at all before I move on to trust funds? All right, trust funds investment pool, again, well within all of our approved asset class ranges here. As noted, the increasing money that we're putting into trust fund over time from the Go Trust, we are actually up above 4 billion in trust funds here as of Monday or as of today. Other than that, kind of ticking along. That does present us with challenges in terms of just trying to keep up our allocations within real estate and real assets in particular. You know, we're obviously allocating there, but managers don't necessarily pull money down immediately, but I think we've done a good job of kind of managing our way into that so far. Trust fund performance, good across all timeframes here. Again, would point you to that bottom table with the yield. The 1 year at 4.17% would expect to see that continue to tick up a little bit. Yield to worst on the portfolio is right around 4.5%. So still some room for that to grow as sort of the lower yielding assets roll off and we are able to put on some higher yielding assets. So good news for the participants overall. Question on trust funds before I go to state fund here. All right. State fund investment pool, again, well within all of our approved asset class ranges, similar asset class breakdown as what you've seen in the past. John and Kirsten met with State Fund a couple of weeks ago. Everything's going well there. State fund investment pool performance. Good performance across all time frames versus our benchmark here. Much to add, I don't think. Questions on state fund? All right. So finally, the update here, I guess, broadly, market uncertainty remains elevated as we continue to see some of the economic data continue to kind of trickle in here from the delay. We are working hard on the DC plans that we're going to give to both you and Impera in February. We have completed just last week all of our on-site due diligence with all the managers. So we're sort of finalizing all of that. And I think we're in good shape there. Expect to have some savings that we can communicate to both boards and more to come. AI, continuing to use it across the organization, kind of cautiously and slowly, but we've got a number of different projects in the works here from several different teams, you know, using it to create draft documents, credit matrix, having it do some of the due diligence meeting notes, et cetera. So good shape there. We'll continue to use it. The summer internship has been posted. We've had a pretty good response so far this year. Got probably, I think, quite a few more resumes than we've had in the past there. So we have managed to get out and talk to a number of the schools. I went to Tech. We had a CFA event in Bozeman. So we've tried to make some contacts there, and hopefully that's paying off a little bit. So we'll see what we get. One other thing I would note is Sam Holman, who was on the fixed income team, left us just last week. Last week she left. She took a job with the Helena School District as the Director of Finance. Great opportunity for Sam. Super happy for her. I'm sure she'll do good things there, but that did leave us with a position on the fixed income team. I think we're completely fine right now. We will repost that here in the not too distant future and that position back. But more than adequate coverage with the three fine fixed income people that we still have. So they've got it handled. And with that, if there are no other questions in me, I will turn it over to.
I have an answer on concentration.
Okay.
Now the question in terms of concentration, like the Nifty 50 area. Late 1972, the top 5 stocks in S&P accounted for about 23% of the index market cap. At the end of September, it's currently about 28%.
And what is it today? It's like 30, is that, or 35 or something? I chat GPT'd it myself out as we were talking.
Yeah, about 28% in the top 5. 21% in the top 3, which is even more amazing, I think.
Interesting. Unique, huh?
Yep. All right, I'll turn it over to Aaron for macro attribution.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Macro attribution, key takeaways on page 23. Starting off with strategic asset allocation, all benchmarks except real estate provided positive contributions to the pension policy neutral 14.2% return. Tactical asset allocation, about 440 million of equity asset classes were sold and 86 million of fixed income or cash asset classes were sold to fund the pension net cash need of 526 million for the 1-year time period. In aggregate, the overweighting, underweighting of the asset classes relative to their benchmarks decreased the pension portfolio's return by about 48 basis points, with, again, the underweight to domestic equity providing most of that underperformance. We've averaged about a 2% underweight to the domestic equity midpoint. The next 2 sections, there hasn't been much directional change, so I think I'll pause there and stop unless there's any specific questions that anybody might have. Thanks. Pass it on.
Thanks, Aaron.
Good morning. It's still morning. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'll start with domestic equities on page 26. So after the brief sell-off in April, it's been pretty much a steady march upward for U.S. stocks. Once again, the themes of mega caps, tech, and AI have dominated. And plus, the market's been a little more optimistic with respect to the prospects of the Fed cutting interest rates. Since the April sell-off, large cap growth stocks are up 28%, which is about 20% more than large cap value. And since April, small caps have picked up. But you'll get quite different performance results depending on which index you're looking at. And I think it says something about what's going on with the stock market. And so let me explain. If you recall our discussion at the last asset class review for domestic equities, different index providers have different methodologies. And in large caps, the different indexes look relatively similar. But in small caps, you can get some differences. And a lot of this has to do with how different providers treat unprofitable companies. So in the Russell 2000, which is really the most widely used small cap index, they include unprofitable companies, which currently is about 46% of that index. We use MSCI, and MSCI doesn't have a profitability screen, but I think the exposure to those companies is maybe a little less than the Russell 2000. And then you take the S&P small cap index, they exclude those companies, and we have a little bit of exposure here through our ETF. And so what we've seen more recently in the market is commonly referred to as a junk rally or a garbage rally. So lower quality has outperformed. And so that means the Russell 2000 MSCI small cap have done much better year to date, and especially since April, than the S&P small cap index. But over long periods of time, higher quality tends to outperform, but more recently this has been reversed. Move to page 27. Upper left-hand corner shows our sector exposures, very small differences between the portfolio and the benchmark, and that we're all passive in domestic equities. And the bottom right shows our small cap overweight, which is close to where it was last quarter. Page 28. So with stocks up, valuations are up as well. S&P 500 is trading at a forward PE of 23 times. Compare that to about 15 times in October 2022. And valuations are up for the top 10 stocks in the S&P 500 as well, trading at a PE of close to 30 times. And we talked about the concentration in the market with the mega cap rally. The top 10 stocks weight has increased in the S&P 500, reaching 40% at the end of the quarter. That's about double from where it was in 2016. Any questions about domestic equities?
So Jason, when we reference that we're all passive in domestic equities, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're just kind of fully exposed to, the S&P 500 index. Are you guys doing any sort of approaches within the passive investing to kind of mitigate some of this concentration at the top end of the S&P 500 or anything you can detail there?
Yeah, so first, our asset class benchmark is the MSCI USA IMI, which includes large caps and small caps. So we will be more diversified than the S&P 500. And as we've talked about more recently, there are a couple of things. We're not making huge bets, but we have been a little bit underweight our midpoint of the asset class in domestic equities. And two, this small cap overweight is a bit of a leaning against the trend in terms of valuations of large caps versus small caps. So those are a couple of things we've done.
Okay, thanks.
Going to international equities on page 29. Good performance from international stocks in the third quarter, a little short of the returns for U.S. stocks, but still international stocks have outperformed the U.S. by quite a bit, more than 10% year to date. And as has been the case recently, the dynamic overseas has been a little bit different than in the U.S., with value stocks having outperformed growth. Large caps and small caps have had relatively similar returns this year. And two, with the risk-on sentiment in the market, emerging markets have outperformed developed markets this year. And like in the U.S., lower quality stocks have outperformed as well. Although the dollar strengthened a bit in the third quarter, the weakness year to date has been a strong tailwind to returns of international stocks, more so in developed markets than in emerging markets. And you can compare this to 2024 and even further back into the past, where currency effect was largely negative due to a stronger dollar. Page 30 shows some of the portfolio characteristics of asset class. Top left-hand corner shows a slight overweight in EM. If you recall that this is not something that we actively manage, it's the combined positioning of our active managers and our passive exposure. The bottom left shows our weight for small caps, which is roughly in line with recent history. Sector exposures in the top right. Again, this is the aggregate exposure of our passive investments combined with our active managers. And the bottom right shows the split between active and passive. Now, this is different from where it's been recently. With the manager termination this quarter, those funds were moved into passive. So our weight in passive increased and active drop. That is, we expect to be temporary. We expect to make manager addition or additions in 2026. Page 31. As in the U.S., valuations are up in international stocks. Going back to the trough in the fall of 2022, international valuations are up 38%. You compare that to about 50% for U.S. stocks. But international stocks continue to trade at a significant discount to U.S. equities. That discount was 34% at the end of the third quarter. Any questions about international equities?
Forgive me. What accounted for that big valuation increase in 2000? I mean, or between 2000 and 2001. What was you went through it, I imagine. So I can't remember. I don't think I was tracking international then. So can you tell me, it's just kind of curious, that what was driving that? Was it a growth story from China or something, and then that spilling over to Europe, or what?
I think that the 2000-2001 period, I think largely international was tracking the U.S. in terms of the dot-com bubble as we look in the past. So.
Oh, I mean, I'm looking at 2020 to 2021. Forgive me. That big peak right there in the middle. It's curious.
COVID and the rebound from COVID.
Ah, there you go. Great. Smart.
Can't see that.
We all lived through that.
Those are the questions. Move on to non-core fixed income on page 32. We had solid returns for the asset class this year. We've benefited from non-high yield strategies, especially. And in the third quarter, all of them outperformed high yield. Convertibles and emerging market debt had posted returns in excess of 13%, which is very good as compared to the high yield index, which has returned about 7%. Moving to page 33, this shows on the left-hand side, the sector exposures. Those differences largely come from the additions of our non-high yield strategies. So for instance, emerging market debt is essentially all foreign government bonds, which is not in the high yield index, and preferreds are very heavy in financials. And that is the same for the credit rating exposures. If you look in the top right-hand corner, both preferreds and emerging market debt have a good chunk in investment grade, which would be the BBB or higher category. And most of convertibles are non-rated, which you see on the far right. And the bottom right shows the exposure by strategy type. No real change here, as we didn't move any money around in the asset class during the third quarter. Page 34, the high yield spreads have been tightening since the sell-off in April, and now we're a little tighter than where we were at the start of the year, but definitely tight relative to historical levels. The positive performance and spread tightening have brought absolute yields down to about 6.7%, which is about 2% less than the highs we saw during the sell-off in April. Any questions about non-core fixed income? Thank you.
Thanks. All right, we're on to real estate.
Indeed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'll be covering off real estate beginning on page 35, where you should be familiar with this page, where we have ownership breakdown on the left, dollar value add performance, and some commentary. Largely speaking, I would say progress in real estate continues. Pricing has been on a slow but steady recovery. Capital is returning. The bid-ask spread continues to narrow. Transactions are picking up more and more each quarter. Debt remains available. Value add at the property level and growing net operating income is going to be the name of the game for value appreciation going forward. We've got a pretty good setup in the years ahead from a supply demand imbalance perspective, which should help drive rents across industrial and multifamily in particular as excess supply in that space gets sopped up. Happy to answer any specific questions about the market or the portfolio. Otherwise, we'll turn to the next page. Hearing none, I'll draw your attention to the real estate characteristics page. We have our asset allocation in the upper left, noting everything is within policy constraints, our diversification upper right, and our private assets only cash flow and NAV activity through time. Questions? I have answers. Hearing none, I'll draw you to the valuation page on 37. Again, prices stabilizing, increasing slowly but surely, as noted in the past 12 months column. You've got a graphical depiction of price movement through time with various property types at the bottom. Happy to answer any specific questions.
Yeah, if you go back 2 pages, you see the 10-year. We are lagging a bit on that. What is that from just a couple funds, or I can't remember. I think you discussed this at the last meeting. What is the difference between the benchmark? I mean, I guess it's just. Is there anything of note there or no? I can't remember what we talked about last time.
I'm sorry, the specific question was what?
I think
If
we're
you
lagging.
look at, I mean, forgive me if I look at the state fund, trust fund. Oh, that's because it's a smaller percent. What is the
benchmark, if you're referring to the difference in the 10-year benchmark returns between state fund and trust fund relative to cap, that is largely and specifically driven by the changes we've made to the benchmark through time, specifically within cap versus holding it steady through time with state fund and trust. At one point in time, we converted from a private benchmark to a publicly traded benchmark, and then we converted back.
Thank you.
You're welcome. If there are no more questions, I'll draw you to the new commitments page. For real estate, we have one. This is a second tranche with a high conviction manager. We refer to the investment entity specifically as Sweetgrass 2. Equus is a nationally focused, vertically integrated, high conviction manager with whom we've had a very long-standing relationship. This specific venture is focused as a continuation of Sweetgrass 1 and is specifically focused on multifamily and industrial in growth markets. The specifics of the venture itself are noted below. Happy to answer any questions.
What's that footprint? I mean, where are they? Where's their footprint?
So currently we own industrial in Atlanta and outside Lakeland, Florida, proximate to a airstrip that is solely owned and operated by Amazon. Multifamily is scattered throughout St. Louis, Atlanta, and the greater Charlotte, Raleigh. We are in the midst of closing a industrial deal as the first acquisition in Sweetgrass 2. That, if I'm not mistaken, is also within the broader Atlanta SMA.
Ethan.
Sorry, yeah, MSA, Metropolitan Statistical Area. Excuse me for using industry jargon.
When you say we are closing, do you mean that these are sponsored deals, or is it are you just talking that the fund is like that the manager will be closing those?
Yeah, when I say we, I am specifically referring to the Montana Board of Investment in partnership with Equus, i.e. we as partners.
This is a separate account.
Yep.
Okay.
Jeff, I thought you might have had a question.
Yeah, that actually, John followed up with the same question. I was confirming the we comments.
I apologize for any confusion there.
No, that's fine.
Okay, great. No further questions. We'll move on to real assets. Again, you'll see the ownership breakdown, the dollar value add performance, and some bullet points addressing oil and gas, housing, rail car aggregates, timber. Happy to answer any questions specific to those bullet points or otherwise, but I will not read them to you out of respect. Hearing none. Characteristics on the following page. Asset allocation in the upper left. We're well within our policy constraints. We've got domestic versus international diversification. In our private assets only, cash flow and net asset value behavior through time. Open to fielding questions.
When you see infrastructure, I mean, there's a ton of new infrastructure funds that are focused on data center or that type of thing. Is that something, when we say infrastructure, what does that infrastructure look like?
So our infrastructure portfolio is consistent of anything from renewable energy development in the emerging markets to renewable energy development in the OECD markets. That's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So think developed markets to rail car exposure, where do we go from here to all the other sort of monopolistic type high barriers to entry, less correlation to economic outcome, industry verticals. Think, for example, waste to energy plants, ferries in Scandinavia, ferry terminals and ferries that ferry people across wide swaths of water, largely ocean. For example, is that helpful?
Yeah.
Great. With no further questions, I'll bring you to the real assets valuation page, where we have historically and continue to show you the price movement of oil. It occurred to me that I should start overlaying this chart with natural gas as well, because while oil and gas has largely been somewhat range bound but moving in a southerly direction, natural gas has behaved quite the opposite with the data center and AI boom and the insatiable demand for LNG exports from international markets. LNG and natural gas are moving in quite positive directions. I switched it up a little bit in the lower chart, showing you the sort of price action with chip and saw timber and how that's sort of been relatively stable over the last few years. If there's any other suggestions, I'm happy to entertain them. I might keep this one in, but certainly with the upper chart, I'm going to ask that natural gas be put in there as well. Happy to answer any other specific questions. With none, we'll bring you to the new commits, of which we have one, similar to Sweetgrass Equus 2. This is a re-up for a second tranche in CBRE Musselshell infrastructure investments. This is a re-up, high conviction. This particular separately managed account has a global mandate. It's focused primarily on digital infrastructure. So think fiber optics, cell phone towers, data centers. However, with the global team and the global mandate, we have discovered that the team has a pretty wide aperture of various other infrastructure investments, and we've given them flexibility to pursue them, which they have on our behalf and will continue to. Just to give you maybe an example of that, existing within the first tranche of the investment is a de novo startup whereby the company is buying road assets from oil and gas operators and timberland operators in Canada, of which those operators are then leasing those roads back from us at a mid-teens return in order so that they may continue to explore oil and gas and service their existing wells, as an example. The specifics of the deal are below. Happy to answer any specific questions otherwise. Hearing none, I will turn it over to my partner, Thomas and Willie, to bring you guys through private investments. Thank you.
Thanks, Ethan. Good afternoon. Members of the board, Chairman. I'm on slide 43, ownership breakdown and performance of the private investments portfolio. Top left-hand chart, again, nothing new.
John, it's a little hard to hear.
Yeah, sorry, apologize for my voice. I'm a little bit under the weather. I'll try to speak up if that's better.
It's better, but no worries, man.
The ownership breakdown, again, primarily in cap. It'll probably remain for at least another 2 quarters that way. If you recall, we did commit to private credit in state fund and trust fund, $15, $35 million respectively. The first capital calls were earlier this year, so by the time 1 year swings around, then we'll see the breakdown and reflective in the performance table below. Performance overall, just a couple notes here. Stable over time, to some of the comments that Paige made in the RVK presentation earlier as well. And secondary goal of the private asset classes is kind of navigating mitigating some of the volatility in the portfolio. So that's what we see here in our performance numbers. You don't see major changes quarter over quarter. So we try to be somewhat stable. On the 1-year number, to go back to Jason's comments, public equities, US equities have been on a roll for the second half of this year. So we see the underperformance here relative to the benchmark within expectations. Long-term performance, as I said, stable and within what we would expect. Any comments or questions on slide 43? I'm hearing none, seeing none. I'll move on to 44. The breakdown characteristics of the portfolio, again, not seeing any major changes here quarter over quarter or year over year for that matter. You see the breakdown by our sub-asset classes. It remains about a quarter in private credit and the remainder in equity-focused strategies. And the breakdown domestic versus international also very stable at about 84-16%. Any questions on that particular slide? I will move on to 45, our kind of valuations environment picture. And you heard me speak earlier this year in some quarters, we clearly saw a pause in deal activity in private markets in the second quarter. Everybody was struggling with some of the tariff announcements and so forth. People put the brakes on a little bit. For the remainder of the year, 2025 actually looks like it is on the path of recovery, and we see some more deal activity, and we're now on track to beating the calendar year 2024 in terms of deal activity and money deployed. Exit activity also had slowed down dramatically throughout the year. It remains relatively slow to history, but we do see signs of recovery here as well, as GPs have started to bring portfolio companies to the market and actually exit them. So all those are positive signs in the asset class. On the right-hand side chart, one note here, you'll see that clearly a break in the last 3 bars from the right relative to the rest, a drop down in use of debt or leverage levels. That is, related to the higher interest rates that we've experienced. So curious to see what happens here now with the possibly most recent Fed announcements of dropping rates further. We'll see if that reverts back to more of average levels. But with the lower leverage levels, of course, GPs or managers have to put more equities into the deals, tend to be a little bit more cautious that way. The drop in leverage levels is actually more closer to what we see in our portfolio. If you recall, the managers that we tend to select use leverage more conservatively than the overall market. So that's actually has come down to closer to what we see in our portfolio. Any questions on the overall environment, comments? Seeing none, then I will move on to the new commitments page. Yes, this is not a competition, but we win. We have a number of deals here on the page, split about equally between new names and re-up opportunities. I'll take on the first handful here, Accolade, Access, and EQT, and then I hand it over to my colleague Willie, who's here in the room as well. I'll start off with Accolade Partners Fund 10 and Venture Fund 2. As you can see here on the board briefs, this is a re-up opportunity for us in a high conviction venture fund of funds model that we allocated or underwrote a number of years ago, three years ago, if I'm not mistaken. And we committed to their subsequent funds $25 million each. Accolade is an independently owned firm, built a long and strong track record in the venture fund of fund allocation. And the main difference here between the flagship fund 10 and the venture fund 2 is that the flagship fund actually allocates to venture as well as growth equity strategies and managers. And venture, as the name may suggest, is a pure venture play. Both of them have very attractive fees, if you can see on the board briefs. Just wanted to highlight that, and open to any questions, comments on those two new commitments here. As I said, $25 million each. There are none. I'll move on to Access Capital Partners. We committed to Access Capital Emerging Managers Fund 1. Access is also a fund of fund based in Paris, France, which allocates to, in this case, the strategy that we selected, emerging managers or fund ones effectively throughout the European pan-European context in generalist funds. The main reason for us to seek this partnership out was the funds that Access allocates to are traditionally much too small for us to allocate at size and scale. Think of, $125 million start out emerging manager fund ones within the European context. So for us to underwrite those, again, I'll make the argument to John and Dan, would have to let Willie and me move to Paris or London for a couple of months to actually get boots on the ground. We're comfortable doing that in the US. We live here, we breathe the space. However, in Europe, it's very difficult to do, so we rely on other service providers to help us out here. Access will become a valued partner in our portfolio and expand our network on the ground there. And as I said, give us, no pun intended, access to managers that we ourselves would not be able to identify, be quick enough to actually move on and allocate at scale. That's the key point here. I'd like to highlight again a management fee, very attractive, and we also were able to, us moving relatively quickly and coming in at size in this fund, we were able to negotiate a fee break here as well. See any questions? I will move on to the next one on my list. That is EQT Healthcare Growth Fund 1. EQT is an older relationship for us, expands into the infrastructure portfolio as well. So you should all be well familiar with EQT as a firm. Healthcare Fund 1, as the number indicates, is a new product for the EQT platform. However, not a really new strategy. EQT is well known for being a successful healthcare investor in the European context, and I just finally launched a designated strategy around that sector, and we'll focus on that in a specific size bracket that we found very attractive. So we decided to partner here with them on that strategy. Again, we're moving in with a reasonable ticket size for us, a $50 million commitment in a relatively small fund for EQT, and we were able to negotiate another fee break here, as you can see on the page. Just wanted to highlight that for the board. Happy to answer any questions or any comments on those three. And if not, I'm seeing none. I'll hand it over to Willie to close us out with the other three commitments.
Yeah, so next up is Kester. This was a November commitment, 40 million pounds. It's a UK-based manager focused on the lower middle market. Sectors are healthcare, information and data, and technology. This was a re-up. We had committed in September of 2023 to Kester Fund 3. Fund 4 will be a similar strategy, and we continue to have conviction in the Kester team. Moving on to Bighorn, this was a July commitment of $100 million. If you remember from the October deep dive, the Bighorn program is our direct co-investment program that we have set up with Fisher Lynch. This is an evergreen fund of one structure. This commitment brings us to $200 million of total committed capital. At this point, we're about $95 million invested out of that $200 million. Finally, we have Capital Spring. This is a Nashville-based private credit manager. Just quickly to start, you'll notice on your board brief on the additional offices line, that is blank. That's an oversight by me. I should have listed their secondary offices, which are New York, Los Angeles, and Atlanta. So apologies for that on my part. But moving on, this was an October commitment for us of $50 million. Capital Spring provides capital solutions to multi-unit and franchise businesses, primarily in food services and restaurants. This is a re-up as well. In 2017, we had committed to their Fund 5, and then in 2021, we committed to their Fund 6. And that's all that I have. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And we'll hand it over to John.
Thank you, Thomas. If I can refer the board to slide 47. You can see there that the benchmark return for the 1 year period was 288. The average yield for the benchmark for the year was 467. So interest rates went up about, on average, mid 30 basis point. Multiply that by about a 6 year duration. gets you a cost of about 200 basis points. So that impacted the return by a negative 200 basis points. Spreads on mortgages and corporates compressed a little bit, so that was an advantage. About 20 basis points. Those added together get you to about that 288 return. Pension and trust funds underperformed because they were long duration, so more affected by that increase in interest rates. Additionally, we were light exposure to corporates, so that cost us a little bit, but selection in corporates made that back, so really no net effect there. State fund during that period was shorter in duration, so less exposed to interest rate movements, so that is the main driver of why state fund performed better. Any questions on that performance? If not, Paige did an excellent job going over the yield curve, so probably don't have anything more to say there. If we look at slide 49, you can see that you'll see the moderately long position in terms of duration as we try to take advantage of that positively sloping yield curve there. Yield advantage, modest 13 basis points. Contribution to duration is significantly short for corporates, is significantly short the index as an offset to equity risk in other parts of the assets. Going on, looking at trust fund, similar dynamics there. Obviously a higher exposure to corporates, although probably lower than what we'd like to be in general, but please do keep in mind we had $230 million come in the third quarter, so that tended to dilute our exposure to corporates, and we'll get there as we find good opportunities. And then looking at state fund, you'll note there, even at the end of the period, they were significantly short, they were long duration to the index, but shorter than the other portfolios, simply due to the buildup in cash in that portfolio as they funded a significant outflow in October for their dividend payment. And happy to take any other questions.
Thanks, John. All right, so I think that gets us to the end of the investment update. Dan, you have anything else to add?
Just quickly, we are ready for the 25th, 26th of February. You have the materials for the February 26th training. I sent that out earlier. Thanks to Becky and Paige for helping us put that together. I will let the board know when we do have the audit opinions that first week of January, and if there's anything we need to discuss ahead of time, you'll certainly know about it relative to non-trivial findings. You have to look forward to John and Jason and the team's DC 457 plan coming forward in the near term. That'll be on your February agenda, probably one of the larger decisions you'll get to make next year. And then the newsletter, obviously continuing. We'll do a quick remarkable training when we conclude the meeting, so you can we'll just march along together and push buttons and show how things work. I guess this is the end of the year. It's already here. The next time we're together is 2026. So maybe just a quick year-end report. We had a hell of a good year. Our customer base grew. We've got more STIP participants than we've ever had. The legislature put hundreds of millions of dollars of money to work with us And they also gave us the opportunity to be more self-directed. We were able to decrease our operating budget by 21% due to that legislative confidence. And as you saw in in the packet from Becky and Paige for the training, over the long term, we are nearly a top decile performing public fund. We're in the top 12%, just shy of that 10% over the longer term, for exactly the reasons Becky and Paige mentioned. We don't take on a lot of risk. We know our clients, we know their liquidity needs, and we're able to match it. So none of that would be possible without our staff. You heard from all of them today, whether it's the classiest woman in the state of Montana in Louise, or John Carpenter's dry wit, or John Ramasco's beautiful face. We've got one of the best funds in the country, and all of that emanates from the top. So thanks to the board for your confidence and your eagerness to let us continue serving. So thank you all. Unless there's any questions from you, we'll stop the recording and we'll move just into a quick, how can we do the remarkables? Yeah.
You know, I'm not available in February on the 26th. I
Yep.
apologize, but I have a commitment.
Not a problem.
All right, thanks, Dan, for the update. And there's no other questions. Let's adjourn.
Okay.